Legendary monsters are literally the strongest, most powerful creatures in D&D, and they have special abilities to indicate that. Most legendary monsters are either gods or beings that are very close to becoming gods, so they're always incredibly strong. A legendary monster always has two traits, legendary resistances and legendary actions. A legendary monster has a certain amount of legendary resistances per day, which they can use to succeed any failed saving throw. This is really powerful as some of the strongest spells and abilities in the game, like Banishment, require a creature to fail a saving throw to be useful. Legendary monsters also have a set amount of legendary actions, which they can use to act outside of their own turn. This is a very useful ability not only because some legendary actions are just very powerful, but also because it lets legendary monsters adapt to the flow of a battle as it's happening and not just act on their own turn. So coming in number 10 on this list, we have Ancient Dragons, but in particular the Ancient Gold Dragon. The Ancient Dragons are a particular class of dragons and can come in a bunch of different varieties, like white, red, copper, and gold. All of the Ancient Dragons are pretty deadly in their own right, as they all have high AC and hit points, but the Ancient Gold Dragon stands out among them because it has the highest AC at 22 and hit points of 546. While the Ancient Gold Dragon might not be able to deal as much damage as, say, an Ancient Red Dragon, the Ancient Gold Dragon has an incredibly powerful breath weapon. It's Weakening Breath, which forces everyone in a 90-foot cone to make a DC 24 strength saving throw. And if they fail, they have disadvantage on strength-based attacks and saving throws for a full minute. Plus, they're still dragons, so their basic attacks are still really powerful. So not only do Ancient Gold Dragons have really strong offensive options, they're also flexible and can defend themselves pretty well if they start getting overwhelmed by attacks. Add to the fact that they have 3 legendary resistances per day, which means they get to ignore 3 failed saves, and you have a pretty formidable boss monster. Another strength of all the Ancient Dragons is their lair actions, which are active while inside their lair. Since this list is focused on legendary creatures, not creatures with lair actions, it's safe to say that Ancient Dragons' lair actions are good. They give the dragon advantage on saving throws and attack rolls, for example, but also completely situational, as it depends whether or not you're fighting them in their lair or not. And a smart party can always find a way to lure a dragon outside of its lair. It just so happens that gold dragons are the most cowardly and cunning of the Ancient Dragons, according to the monster manual. So they're going to be the hardest to coax out of the lair, and you'll usually have to fight them with their lair actions active. If you play D&D and encountered an Ancient Dragon, you might be surprised it's only at number 10 on this list. But remember, the strongest legendary creatures are essentially just gods, so the fact that Ancient Dragons score so high in this list is pretty impressive in of itself. And at number 9, we have Niv-Mizzet, a unique legendary creature from Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica sourcebook. He's a gargantuan dragon and has an AC of 22 and 370 hit points. What's unique about Niv-Mizzet is that he's the only high challenge rating dragon that has spellcasting built into his stat block. He's a spellcaster first and a dragon second. That being said, he has all of the strengths of an ancient dragon. The high hit points, the high physical attacks, and the 80-foot fly speed. But Niv-Mizzet also has extra strong spell-based traits that really make him stand out. The only thing he's lacking is in his hit points, which are lower than most dragons, and the lair actions. But this extra spellcasting more than makes up for it. His trait, Locus of the Firemind, lets him maintain concentration on 2 spells at once. And with spells like Polymorph, Wall of Fire, a 9th level spell slot at his disposal, he can definitely put the trait to good use and deal heavy area of effect damage to a party. You might also think that Wall of Fire is okay, but not great, since it can only do fire damage. But Niv-Mizzet's other trait, Master Chemister, allows him to change any spell damage to the type of cold, fire, force, lightning, or thunder, which makes spells like Wall of Fire especially versatile. Another great thing about Niv-Mizzet is that, in addition to the 3 legendary resistances he gets per day, he also has the Magic Resistance trait, which gives him advantage on any saving throws against magical effects. When a legendary monster has this trait, it's generally pretty bad news, because it just makes it even harder for them to fail a saving throw because they already have advantage, and if they fail, they still have legendary resistances. Niv-Mizzet also has a pretty great legendary action he can make use of as well, Draco Genius, which lets him regain a spell slot of 3rd level or lower every round. Niv-Mizzet's 3rd level spells include spells like Slow and Counterspell, so it gives him a great option to use if he's not in range for any of his other attacks. Niv-Mizzet's spells and his more flexible legendary actions put him a little bit higher than the regular ancient dragons in power level, which lets him just about take up the number 9 spot on this list. And at number 8, we have Orcus, a demon lord that has been a staple of D&D adventures for a long time. Orcus is a huge fiend with an AC of 20 and 405 hit points. Similar to Niv-Mizzet and like many other demon monsters in D&D, Orcus has the Magic Resistance trait, which means his 3 legendary resistances per day are even more useful. Although the coolest thing about Orcus is definitely the item he carries with him, the Wand of Orcus. When he holds it, he can use the 9th level spell Power Word Kill 3 times per day, which is already pretty powerful. But he can also cast Conjure Dead once per day, which means he can conjure any generic undead creatures with a combined hit points of 500 or less. This means Orcus can summon multiple Demi-Liches and a Ghost Dragon, for example, all with one action. Summoning creatures in D&D is already pretty strong, but summoning entire boss monsters as minions is just on another level. The only bad thing about Orcus is really that if you manage to take the Wand of Orcus from him, he becomes a lot weaker. His AC goes down to 17, and he can't cast the Conjure Dead spell anymore. He's still strong, but he'd definitely be below Niv-Mizzet if it wasn't for the wand. And since the wand isn't permanently attached to him, it explains why he's only at number 8 on this list, even though it's such a strong item. And at number 7, we have another Demon Lord, Zariel, who is also the main antagonist of Descent into Avernus campaign. Zariel is a large fiend with an AC of 21 and 420 hit points. Being a fellow Demon Lord, Zariel is kind of on the same power level as Orcus. She also has the magic resistance trait, for example, and has 3 legendary resistances as well. But Zariel's AC isn't limited by her having a particular weapon like Orcus has with his Wand of Orcus. Her base AC is already 21, which is just way higher than Orcus without the wand. And she also has a bunch of powerful spells like Blade Barrier and Finger of Death at her disposal. Importantly, Zariel also has some pretty good legendary actions, with the best one probably being that, in between other characters' turns, she can cast Teleport 3 times every round, up to 120 feet in a different place. This means she's incredibly hard to pin down, and can easily get close to backline spellcasters or rogues without provoking attacks of opportunity. Zariel's other legendary action is Immolating Gaze, which is just 4d10 fire damage on a DC 26 Wisdom save. She can only do this action once per round though, which makes it a bit less good. The main strength of Zariel is her maneuverability, which utilizes the flexibility of the legendary action mechanic really well. Not only that, but the fact that she's also the centerpiece of an entire campaign in 5e, namely Descent into Avernus, means that her lair actions in Avernus have been really fleshed out in 5e, which just makes her an even more compelling boss monster. If you're facing Zariel, you already know your DM has a wealth of inspiration to draw from, and it might not be the last time you see her. Other than that though, her damage is definitely strong, but she's just not as powerful as some of the higher spots on this list. And at number 6, we have Tromokratis, a gargantuan creature with an AC of 22 and 409 hit points. Tromokratis is a type of kraken, and was introduced first in the Mythic Odysseus of Theros book, so it's basically just a super buffed up version of a regular kraken. Tromokratis gets higher than either of the Demon Lords on this list because of one simple reason. It has mythic actions. Now, mythic actions are another version of legendary actions, and they were introduced with the Mythic Odyssey of Theros book along with Tromokratis. A creature with mythic actions doesn't immediately have access to them though. Something needs to happen for them to be unlocked. Usually this means the creature with mythic action needs to reach 0 hit points, and when it doesn't die. Instead, it enters its second phase of the fight, getting more health and finally gaining access to its mythic actions, which are basically just stronger versions of legendary actions the creature already had, and work the same way as legendary actions do. In Tromokratis' case, when it gets taken down to 0 health, it reveals the 4 hearts in its chest, each with an AC of 22 and 100 hit points, which the party has to then destroy to really take Tromokratis down. Basically, mythic actions are there to make boss fights even more crazy memorable, while providing a surprising challenge for players that think they have a monster beaten. When its mythic actions have been unlocked, Tromokratis can use them to either swallow a creature with its bite, or make 2 attacks that do a combined total of 64 bludgeoning damage and can knock a character prone or grapple them. If it needs to be defensive, Tromokratis can use its mythic action to gain +2 to AC for an entire round of combat, which is a really strong ability. Now, having a second health bar in mythic actions is already pretty good, and would definitely be enough to put Tromokratis at the number 6 spot on this list. But Tromokratis also has an upgraded version of the magic resistance trait, which is this trait, Spell Resistance Carapace. Similar to magic resistance, it gives Tromokratis advantage in saving throws against magic, but it also makes spell attacks against Tromokratis have disadvantage. The magic resistance trait is already really good when combined with legendary resistances, and Tromokratis' trait is just a better version of that. So it makes fighting it and taking Tromokratis down even harder. The only downside to Tromokratis is that during its second phase, it relies on the stats of its hearts and not its own stats, and the hearts don't actually have very good saving throws, with +0 to every saving throw. So once the party figures that out, even with the spell resistant carapace trait, the second phase of the fight isn't going to be that difficult for them. There are creatures with mythic actions that just have a better second phase than Tromokratis. Add to that, it's also quite slow on land, with a walking speed of only 13 feet, which means a smart party that's able to draw it out of the water can easily kite the boss around. Tromokratis is really only good at fighting in water, which makes it a lot less flexible than some of the higher spots on this list. And at number 5, we have Tulkesh, our first truly godlike creature from the Eberron setting. Tulkesh is a huge fiend with an armor class of 23, or 25 if it's being hit by a ranged attack, and 478 hit points. Just like the Demon Lords earlier in this list, Tulkesh has the magic resistance trait. Unlike Khatesh, however, whose lowest saving throw is a +0, Tulkesh's lowest saving throw is a +4 for dexterity, and his highest is a +17 on strength. So getting him to fail a saving throw is almost impossible. Tulkesh is also called the Rage of War, a name he lives up to as there's probably no creature better at pure close quarter combats than him. He gets to make 4 weapon attacks per turn with a maximum range of 600 feet on his ranged weapons, and an average of 28 force damage on every melee attack. With a flying speed of 18 feet, he's probably never going to be out close combat range, and even if he is, the range on his range attacks means he can give even the slipperiest of parties a hard time. Tulkesh's damage is also increased even more by 2 of his traits, Whirlwind to Weapons and Deadly Critical. Deadly Critical essentially doubles Tulkesh's chance to get a critical hit, getting 1 on a 19 or a 20, and lets him roll his dice 3 times instead of twice, which basically just adds another 50% extra damage to his crits. Whirlwind of Weapons just means Tulkesh does 4d6 force damage to any creature within 10 feet of him. Combined with the fact that he can cast 3 different types of smites once per day, means Tulkesh can do a lot of damage with just a single attack. Just an example, if someone starts their turn within 10 feet of him, and he rolls a 19 on a Banishing Smite attack, that means they take 9d12 plus 9 force damage from the crit roll weapon, then another 15d10 force damage from the Banishing Smite. That's an average of 149 force damage on one of his 4 attacks. Unlike Khatesh earlier, who only really had strong mythic actions, Tulkesh's best legendary action is also incredibly strong. While it does take all 3 of his legendary actions, he can use it to make everyone in a 60-foot area of him make an attack against a random creature, and if there's no creature in range, they make a ranged attack, throwing their weapon if necessary. So not only can he force you to attack all your allies outside of his turn, he also has one of the strongest abilities in the game, which is to disarm your character, and he can do that every round. The only things really stopping Tulkesh from being higher on this list is that most of his abilities just help him do more damage. He doesn't have many attacks that apply conditions, and his range attacks outside of it are a bit limited. If he had mythic actions in a second phase, Tulkesh might be in the top 3 in this list, though simply because all the damage he can put out, and the fact that most of it is force damage, which basically nothing has resistance to. Coming in number 4 on this list, we have Great Worms. The Great Worms are another class of dragons similar to the Ancient Dragons at the number 10 on this list. They were first introduced in Fizbane's Treasury of Dragons, and they're basically just an extremely strong, upgraded version of the Ancient Dragons. The stats of the Great Worms are all slightly different, but the strongest ones are Gargantuan Dragons, have 4 legendary resistances per day, with an AC of 22 and 565 hit points. Now, all of the Great Worms are pretty strong, regardless of their stats and their abilities, which are pretty much the same as the Ancient Dragons. They have bite, claw, and tail attacks as well as breath weapons, with the main difference between Great Worms and Ancient Dragons being that most of the Great Worms also have mythic actions in a second phase. So when they're brought to 0 hit points, they reset to 425 hit points, regain their legendary resistances, and recharge their breath weapons immediately. Even though Great Worms are quite similar to each other, the metallic Great Worms are probably still the strongest. And that's mainly for 2 reasons. First of all, the metallic Great Worms have an extra option for their breath weapon, which is Sapping Breath, a 300-foot cone breath weapon with a DC 25 saving throw, becoming unconscious for a full minute. Now, you do get to save again at the end of each of your turns, but making a creature unconscious on a DC 25 saving throw for even 1 turn is just really strong. Not only that, because the metallic Great Worm also has a unique mythic action, Shattering Roar, which costs 2 of their 3 legendary actions and is a 120-foot radius sphere centered on the Great Worm. If you're in the radius, you have to make a DC 26 Constitution saving throw or be incapacitated until the end of your next turn. Now, their breath weapon is already powerful, but it needs to be recharged. Shattering Roar, on the other hand, is an ability the metallic Great Worm can use every round, and it has an incredibly high DC. Normally on strong creatures, an ability like Shattering Roar would be once or twice per day, so the fact that it can use it every round is just kinda broken. However, even though they're extremely versatile, and definitely more versatile than a lot of the other lower entries on this list, Great Worms still aren't as strong as the creatures in the top 3 of this list. If you or your DM run a Great Worms as spellcasters, like Niv-Mizzet at number 9 on this list, then they definitely make the top 3. As it stands though, they're sitting comfortably at number 4, which is still pretty good, considering it's higher than a literal god. And at number 3, we have Khatesh. Now, Khatesh is, bluntly put, a beast. For a long time, people considered her the strongest printed monster in 5e, which says a lot about the power level of the higher spots in this list. Khatesh is also from Eberron and is a large fiend with 22 AC, 475 hit points. What's even more impressive about Khatesh is that she makes it to number 3 spot on this list without even having a mythic action. That's just how strong her base kit is without any second phase. The main thing that makes Khatesh so strong is her once per day ability, Arcane Cataclysm. Arcane Cataclysm is one of the strongest abilities on any creature, because it essentially acts as an incredible offensive ability and an incredible defensive ability all in one. When she uses it, Khatesh conjures 3 orbs with a 40-foot radius anywhere within 1 mile that slam into the ground, and anyone in their area has to make a DC 26 dexterity saving throw or take 11d12 force damage, or half as much if they succeed. This wouldn't be so bad, especially because there's a good amount of ways to avoid the damage completely if you're a monk or a rogue who has evasion. But then, the 40-foot radius fields themselves also act as anti-magic fields, which means that no spells can be cast inside them, and any magical weapons become non-magical. Except Khatesh and her spells aren't affected by these fields at all. So Khatesh can just stand inside these 40-foot radius spheres and cast spells like Chain Lightning and Power Word Kill, as well as her basic 1d10 plus 10 force damage attacks with a 120-foot range, and you can't do anything to her. Even if you're a fighter with its Vorpal Sword gets in range of Khatesh, it won't have any of its magical properties because of the anti-magic field, so it does non-magical damage, which Khatesh is completely immune to anyway. Even if somehow you manage to make a spell attack or weapon attack against Khatesh or get out of her anti-magic field, she can cast Counterspell or Shield at will, which will let her cancel your spells or get +5 to her AC for a full round of combat. If that doesn't work, one of Khatesh's legendary actions lets her stop concentration on a spell immediately within 120 feet if that creature fails a DC 26 Wisdom save. Plus, she also still has magic resistance along with 3 legendary resistances per day. Even then, if you somehow manage to do damage to Khatesh, she can just teleport away, which she gets to use once per day as well. And you'll find it hard to counterspell her teleport if she's counterspelling your counterspell. The only real drawback Khatesh has is that even though she's powerful, her actual movement speed of 40 feet is quite slow. If you're not trying to defeat her and are just trying to run away, your party is probably going to survive the encounter, especially if you have mounts or movement speed buffs like haste. Khatesh is still definitely the strongest spellcaster monster in D&D, which makes her more than deserving of the number 3 spot on this list. And rumbling its way into number 2, we have the Tarrasque. The Tarrasque is a gargantuan creature with an AC of 25, 675 hit points, and is probably the most well-known original D&D monster. And some of you might be surprised that it's not at the top of this list. That's because, despite its reputation, the Tarrasque has one pretty enormous weakness that we'll get to in a bit. The Tarrasque is deadly, for sure. It's got a huge amount of hit points, and its beefiness of its health dwarfs basically any other statted D&D creature. Even gods like Khatesh can't stand up to the Tarrasque in terms of sheer defensive capabilities, which means it does truly live up to its reputation as the ultimate boss monster in D&D. Its main crazy ability is its trait Reflective Carapace. This says that if the Tarrasque is targeted by a magic missile spell, or any spell that requires a ranged attack roll, you roll a d6. On a 1 to 5, the Tarrasque is unaffected, and on a 6, the Tarrasque is still unaffected, but it bounces the spell back. This means that the Tarrasque is just completely unaffected by spell attacks, along with also having magic resistance and 3 legendary resistances. So if you want to do any damage to Tarrasque with spells, you're gonna have to do it through its legendary resistances, as well as its magic resistance, because you just can't use spell attacks at all. The Tarrasque can also take 6 actions on its turn, a DC 17 saving throw for a frightened condition, along with Bite, 2 claws, horns, and a tail attack, the weakest of which still does an average of 24 damage, along with being able to knock creatures prone or even swallow them. The Tarrasque's swallow action is definitely one of the most powerful abilities, especially because it can actually use a legendary action to swallow a creature outside of its turn. If you're swallowed by Tarrasque, you're going to be taking 16d6 acid damage every turn, and you can only escape if you deal more than 60 damage in 1 turn. Considering being swallowed also gives you the blinded and restrained condition, that's a pretty hard thing to accomplish. However, the main reason it's still at number 2 in this list is that, similar to Khatesh, it has really low movement speed. Even though it can use legendary actions to move half its speed, its base speed is only 40 feet. This means that in a round, the Tarrasque can only move a total of 140 feet, and that's if it uses its action to dash. Even Kratos has the option of moving faster in water, but the Tarrasque doesn't have that out. For mobile parties, especially ones that create difficult terrain, it's actually quite easy to exceed the movement speed and kite a Tarrasque in an area that's large enough, so there won't be any problems in keeping it at bay. However, that doesn't change the fact that actually fighting the Tarrasque on its own terms is basically impossible, even if at the highest level of play. All in all, in a situation where the Tarrasque gets to fight like it wants to, it can dish out incredible amounts of damage. But it's possible to avoid those situations if you have a skilled party, which means it only takes number 2 spot on this list. And at the top spot on this list, we have both of the aspect dragons, the aspect of Tiamat and the aspect of Bahamut. Both of these creatures were introduced in Fizbane's Treasure of Dragons, and are essentially manifestations of the old dragon gods, Tiamat and Bahamut. These two share a spot on this list because they're just that far removed from the other legendary monsters in terms of strength, and they both have similar stats. For this list though, we'll mainly be talking about the aspect of Tiamat, because the aspect of Bahamut is a bit more focused around healing and defense, which is going to make it harder to kill but less likely to put out a huge amount of damage, and so it's not quite as strong as the aspect of Tiamat. The aspect of Tiamat is a gargantuan dragon with an AC of 23 and 574 hit points. Because Tiamat is the god of the chromatic dragons, the aspect of Tiamat has all of the abilities of the Great Worms rolled into one. It can use any type of breath weapon, and also has mythic actions that unlock when it reaches 0 hit points. However, the aspect of Tiamat just does significantly more damage than any of the Great Worms, along with its breath weapon being able to choose what kind of damage it deals, with 300-foot range and a dexterity saving throw of DC 27. So any resistance a character might have to particular damage types are pretty much nullified. Similar to the Great Worms, the aspect of Tiamat also regains its legendary resistances when it falls to 0, as well as gaining another 500 hit points, and recharges its breath weapon to do even more damage. Except that, instead of 4 legendary resistances like the Great Worms, the aspect of Tiamat has 5 legendary resistances per day, which means that if you want to kill it in its second phase, you're going to have to go through a total of 10 legendary resistances, which is the most amount of any monster on this list. What's more, even though it may seem like the aspect of Tiamat has less health than something like a Tarrasque, because of its second phase, it actually has a total of 1,074 hit points, which is the highest hit point total in all of D&D. Also, the mythic actions it gets in the second phase are pretty insane, and are basically the strongest actions of that type in the game. Probably the best one is Hurl Through Avernus, which forces one creature to make a DC 25 Charisma saving throw, and if they fail, they take 8d10 psychic damage and are banished to Avernus until the start of the aspect's next turn. In contrast to the Tarrasque as well, the aspect doesn't have limited movement at all, being able to fly 120 feet, which makes it harder to slow down with difficult terrain and almost impossible for an entire party to outrun. So unlike some of the other spots on this list, neither of the aspect dragons compromise on movement abilities for sheer power. They're versatile, quick, and powerful all at once. All in all, the aspects of the dragon gods, and the aspect of Tiamat in particular, are basically perfect D&D boss monsters, and are the best examples of what a truly legendary creature should feel like in D&D, which makes them more than deserving of the #1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the video. If you fought any of these legendary monsters, be sure to leave your party stories down below in the comments, along with any other suggestions for similar videos you'd like to see made.